From Launch Complex 39 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, this is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 3 hours and holding. We are now in the final 5 hours of the countdown for the launch of Space Shuttle Atlantis on mission STS-129. The countdown is being controlled from Flying Room 4 at the Launch Control Center, and we are on schedule for a liftoff targeted for 2:28 p.m. Eastern Time. This is the 129th launch of the Space Shuttle program, the 31st launch of Space Shuttle Atlantis, and the 31st visit to the International Space Station. This is an 11-day mission that includes 3 6.5-hour EVAs or spacewalks. Landing is currently planned for the day after Thanksgiving on November 27th at 9:43 a.m. There are 6 astronauts who will shortly be aboard Atlantis en route to a rendezvous with the International Space Station. The astronauts are Commander Charlie Hobaugh, pilot Butch Wilmore, and mission specialists Leland Melvin, Randy Bresnik, Mike Foreman, and Bobby Satcher. Activities underway during the past hour have been the inertial measurement pre-flight calibrations, the alignment of the Mila tracking station antenna and the Ponce de Leon inlet tracking station antennas with the launch pad, activating the orbiter's navigation aids, and the initial communications checks with the Air Force Eastern Range. Meanwhile, the final inspection team has been measuring the temperatures on the surface of the vehicle, looking for any ice buildup and performing a final check for any FOD or foreign object debris that could strike the orbiter upon ignition. The 7-member team will have walked up and down the entire 380-foot tower of the fixed surface structure at the conclusion of their inspections. Fueling of Space Shuttle Atlantis began at 5:03 this morning and concluded at exactly 8 a.m. Eastern Time without any issues. And the countdown continues not to work any problems and has been going very smoothly. We have approximately 59 minutes and 30 seconds remaining in this hold at T-minus 3 hours. And our weather forecast is not quite as favorable as what we had yesterday. We're looking at a 30% chance of not meeting the launch weather criteria by the time we get to liftoff time at 2:28, primarily due to an increased chance for a low cloud deck. And we'll hear more about that in about a half hour with one of the launch weather officers who will be here to talk more about our launch weather and our forecast for overseas at the overseas contingency landing sites. At T-minus 3 hours and holding, this is Shuttle Launch Control. This is Shuttle Launch Control, T-minus 3 hours and holding, with 56 minutes 30 seconds remaining in this planned built-in hold. Meanwhile, the final inspection team is continuing their walk down of Launch Pad 39A. We're going to look now at some video of some of the preparations that were done to orbiter Atlantis to prepare it for its launch today, beginning at the orbiter processing facility in Bay 2. The external tank was the first to arrive in the processing flow. The tank was transported by barge from Michoud in Louisiana to the Kennedy Space Center and to the Vehicle Assembly Building. It arrived at the Kennedy Space Center on August 3rd of 2009. Once going under the bridge on the Banana River, the barge then begins its trip northbound, which goes along the Banana River until approaching the barge turning basin by the Vehicle Assembly Building. Here the barge is seen going underneath the bridge on the Banana River. This is the barge Pegasus that has been hauling flight hardware since the Apollo days when Saturn V stages used to come in by this barge. Here is the external tank being offloaded from the barge adjacent to the vehicle assembly building. And we can see Space Shuttle Discovery in the background being rolled out to the launch pad. And the barge was then towed over to the VAB to the transfer aisle, where it was then rotated to vertical and placed into a test cell for some checkout. And the external tank was then moved over to the high bay, to high bay 1, where it was lowered into position between the two solid rocket boosters. This was on the 21st of September. And after the tank was in position between the two boosters, it underwent checkout. We're now in Bay 2 of the orbiter processing facility, where we see the installation of the orbiter docking system. This was being reinstalled after it had been removed from the Hubble Space Telescope flight. And it was then extended as part of a retesting sequence. Here are two orbiter booms just prior to closing of the payload bay doors. And that's the KU band communications tracking and data relay satellite antenna being stowed into the payload bay before the payload bay door was closed around it. Payload bay doors were closed on September the 25th. And then Atlantis was backed out of Bay 1 in preparation for going over to the vehicle assembly building transfer aisle. This was on October the 6th, 2009. Here we are in front of Bay 1. And there's some of the team that has been processing Atlantis in Bay 1 of the orbiter processing facility, and will be staying with it as it goes over to the vehicle assembly building in preparation for being mated to the external tank and solid rocket boosters. Atlantis is now making the turn toward the north end of the vehicle assembly building's transfer aisle, where it was then hoisted off the transporter using a lifting sling and rotated to the vertical position. And it was gradually rotated to completely vertical. This again on the same day, October the 6th. And then being hoisted directly into the high bay. The awaiting external tank and solid rocket booster stack. And then it was lowered down alongside the external tank, where it was affixed to the tank and the boosters for the shuttle interface test. A combination of electrical and mechanical checkout to assure that it's ready for rollout to the launch pad. The stack had already been checked out previously prior to the arrival of Atlantis. And then we have the rollout of Atlantis from the VAB to Launch Pad 39A on October the 14th. Rollout taking approximately 7 hours, moving along the crawlerway at approximately 0.8 of a mile per hour. And this is some time-lapse photography of the rollout as it arrives at the pad. And the shuttle gradually making its way up the ramp over the crawlerway of bed of river gravel. Again, we have some time-lapse photography.
I hear your question.
And joining us now here at the Public Affairs Console in the firing room is Angie Brewer. She is the flow director for Atlantis, and she's been following Atlantis since its return after the last mission. How long, Angie, before the solid rocket booster stacking and the external tank integration did the processing actually get underway with Atlantis?
Well, we brought Atlantis back from Dryden on. Let's see, we brought Atlantis back from Dryden. We got back on dock on June 2nd, and we processed Atlantis for about 122 days. We started our SRB, or solid rocket booster stacking, in the end of August. So it takes about 5 weeks to do the solid rocket booster stacking and the ET processing, and then we bring the orbiter out and made it to the stack.
Well, since the Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission was Atlantis's last mission, what had to be done that was different from the orbiter returning as it ordinarily would from a space station mission?
Well, the biggest thing is something that you mentioned on your tape is, since we weren't going to the station, we didn't need the orbiter docking station system, and so as a weight savings and to help with the center of gravity for the Hubble mission, we removed the docking system, and this time we had to reinstall it and check it out, and also we had to deconfigure the Hubble payload from the previous mission and with its IMAX cameras and film, and then reconfigure for the ISS mission that we're getting ready to do.
Well, there's some additional checkout now that you're doing on the orbiters as they get ready for launch, and I think one in particular thing that now we're watching for each time. Can you tell us what that was?
Are you talking about the wing leading edge?
Wing leading edge, correct.
We do corrosion inspection. We do periodic inspections of the orbiters, and we make sure that there's no corrosion or any type of things that are going wrong. So we look for corrosion. We have to take the vehicle apart and put it back together, and we try and do it in the time allotted for the flow if it's not a mandatory mission.
Now, do the personnel working on Atlantis also work on the other orbiters, or do they stay only with Atlantis? How does that work?
Well, Atlantis has been in Bay 1 since return to flight exclusively, and we have a core team of people that work on Atlantis. I'd say when we have high times where we need a lot of help with work, we might borrow or from other bays, or the other bays may borrow from us. But when it gets to the vertical in the VAB or the OP or the pad, we basically use the same folks as the other vehicles.
Well, now one interesting thing that was going on in the VAB and later at the pads as well is that we had another completely different kind of vehicle next door in High Bay 3.
Right, and yeah, we had the Aries being stacked the same time that we were in the vertical, and actually we had to start our SRB buildup earlier to help integrate that with the Aries effort. So yeah, just like the last mission, the Hubble mission, we had a dual integrated flow. This time we also had a dual integrated flow with the Aries.
And did that mean anything special once we got out to the launch pad?
For us, once we do use some of the same resources, so we did have to make sure that we didn't step on each other's toes.
So it's sort of like living in the same house and sharing the kitchen, I guess.
Right, yeah.
So, well, Angie, thank you very much, and hopefully, since everything seems to be going well on the countdown, the weather will clear here this afternoon, and we'll be off our 11-day mission.
All
So,
right, thanks, George.
thank you very much. And we now have 43 minutes, 22 seconds remaining in this hold at T-minus 3 hours. This is shuttle launch control. This is shuttle launch control, T-minus 3 hours and holding. Joining us now in the firing room is Scott Higginbotham. He was the STS-129 payload mission manager here at the Kennedy Space Center. And we're here with Scott to talk some about what we've done to get the payloads ready for this flight for Atlantis. Scott, how much of this hardware has the test team worked with before, and what's new? And are there any new payload design concepts?
Well, this mission is very different in a lot of respects from missions we've flown in the past. We have two brand new carriers, the two Express Logistics carriers. They were designed and fabricated by the Goddard Space Flight Center. They leveraged off of their experience building hardware to support the Hubble Space Telescope servicing missions, and came up with these large carriers with the intent in mind to pre-position very large spare parts for the exterior of the space station and leave them there for future use. What's unique about these two carriers for this mission is that they're larger than any of the other stowage platforms that we've used in the past. They're also more capable, not only for supporting the replacement parts, but for supporting payloads, research payloads out on the exterior of the station. What also makes this mission unique is that we're flying 15 different payloads and large replacement parts on these two carriers, and that nearly matches the number of ORUs and payloads for the exterior of the station that we've ever prepared before. So this mission, from a scale perspective, from our point of view, has been particularly challenging.
Well, let's look at some tape now, what we've done to prepare these payloads for the flight. And Scott, if you could tell us what we're seeing as we go along.
You bet. Let's see, this is a Air Force C-17 transport aircraft. It arrived at KSC on the 21st of March of this year, containing the first Express Logistics carrier. Express Logistics Carrier 2 actually arrived earlier by truck back in December of last year. The hardware came down from the Goddard Space Flight Center where it was prepared. Originally, the deck structure was built in Minnesota by a company there. You'll notice here that the hardware is actually on a truck that rolls off of the C-17 and then is delivered to our space station processing facility. The clearance between the sides of that box and the sides of the aircraft was about 1 inch. The Air Force did an absolutely magnificent job supporting us getting this hardware here. Next, you see us removing the pieces of the shipping container to expose the flight element, and then cleaning it up before we place it into its work stand in the clean room. The decks came down to us essentially bare. They had all of their primary subsystems installed, less the avionics, which came later. None of the replacement parts have been installed. None of the cabling that support those ORUs and payloads have been installed yet. That's all work that was done here at KSC. The hardware was lowered down into one of two processing footprints that we used in the SSPF for this flow. Between these two stands, we had a rotation stand that was specially designed to flip each of these elements over on their back so that we can work on either side. Now you're going to see the first installation of an orbital replacement unit onto ELC-1. This is a control moment gyro, which is used on the station for attitude control purposes. We have two of them flying on this mission, one on each of the upper surfaces of each deck. And what we're going to do for illustrative purposes is we're going to show you the installations of most of the ORUs on Deck 1. The process for Deck 2 is very similar. This is a latching end effector, or a hand, for the Canadarm2, the arm, the robotic arm on the space station. It was the second ORU to be installed. Now, preceding these ORU installations were months of efforts just to build up these individual assemblies, prepare the replacement parts, and all of the various equipment that goes between them and the deck. Some of the ORUs also required servicing of fluids, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So there were about 6 months of effort preceding these installations. The installations on Deck 1 took place on about a 1-month period, starting in mid-August and ending in mid-September of this year. And there's the Lee being put into its final location. This is a battery charge discharge unit. It supports the external power system on the ISS. Controls when power flows to the batteries and from the batteries that are out on the external truss assembly. It's one of the smaller of the orbital replacement units that we're launching on this mission. Then we flip the deck over on its back. There's the top surface with 3 of the 4 ORUs. And now we're getting ready to put the first one on the bottom side. This is a nitrogen tank assembly. It contains 2,500 psi nitrogen that we serviced here at KSC in a hazardous operation. This nitrogen is used to pressurize the ammonia in the external thermal control system of the station. There's 2 of these flying on the mission, one on the bottom side of each of the 2 decks. And there you can see it being lowered down carefully into its attach mechanism, and there it is installed. Next to go on was a pump module assembly. We have 2 pump module assemblies flying with us, again, one on each of the bottom side of each deck. These are actually used to pump the anhydrous ammonia around the external thermal control system of the ISS. And there it is being lowered into position as well. This is a plasma contactor unit, or PCU. It's was the last item to be installed. We skipped over the ammonia tank assembly. The ammonia tank contains 600 pounds of anhydrous ammonia for the thermal control system on the exterior of the station. It was a hazardous operation, so we didn't have the camera crew there that day. This PCU is going on here in mid-September, and that completed the outfitting of ELC-1. Our flight crew came in on November 11th and did their final walk down in the space station processing facility of the hardware. They focused on the hardware that they will be manipulating during this mission, the high-pressure gas tank and the MISSI-7 payload. Finally, on the 21st of October, both elements were weighed and then installed into our transportation canister for delivery to the pad. In this view, you can see ELC-1 on its way down to the canister. You can also see in this image the keel assembly that constrains the element in the Y direction in the orbiter. It stays in the orbiter when the elements are deployed to the ISS and will be coming home for use on a future mission. On the same day, we hoisted ELC-2 and installed into the canister as well. It's a mirror image twin of ELC-1 from a configuration point of view of the structure. It has a different ORU complement, has the same nitrogen tank, CMG, and pump module, but it also has a high-pressure oxygen tank with 2,500 psi of oxygen on board. It also has a TUS reel assembly, which is a trailing umbilical for the mobile transporter that moves up and down the truss assembly. And it also has a cargo transport container that has a lot of small power control modules for the exterior of the station. We took the canister down to our rotation facility and rotated it vertical And then we rolled out on the 30th of October for the slow roll to Pad A. That trip takes about 3 hours from start to finish. And we did it in the middle of the night. We typically do that because the weather is, generally speaking, better that time of night here in Florida. Once the canister arrives at the pad, it is spotted under the rotating service structure and then hoisted up into that structure. Inside the rotating service structure, there's a 5-story gantry on rails called the Payload Ground Handling Mechanism, or PGM as we call it. And that structure extracts the payload elements from the canister. The canister is then lowered out of the way. The rotating service structure goes around the orbiter, and the elements are installed using that gantry into the orbiter. And here's the crew during one of their final walkdowns after TCDT. They came in and took another look at the hardware just prior to it being installed in the orbiter. And here's what it looked like after it was installed and the doors were on their way closed for flight. This just took place a few days ago on the 13th of November, culminating years of effort to bring this mission to reality. So that brings us up to where we are today. All of the hardware that makes up what we call the ULF-3 launch package is on board and ready to fly.
What's been the scope of NASA involvement overall on this mission beyond just what's been going on here at Kennedy Space Center, what we've seen here?
Well, this mission really typifies the One NASA concept. We've had involvement from a variety of centers. The Goddard Space Flight Center developed and built the Bear carriers. The Johnson Space Flight Center was involved in integrating the mission, putting together the complement that's flying with us and doing all the analysis necessary to prove that it's going to work right. We did the physical integration. We also had support from the Marshall Space Flight Center, which actually controls the ELCs when they're on orbit. And then we had a couple of ORUs that were sponsored by the Glenn Research Center. So again, a number of NASA centers were involved in making this mission, this payload complement, a reality.
Well, Scott, thank you very much. And I guess the next exciting time for you is actually on orbit as you watch all of these things come together.
Absolutely. It's going to be a treat for us to see this hardware where it finally belongs, attached to the truss elements on the ISS.
Well, we have 30 minutes remaining in this planned built-in hold. We're at T-minus 3 hours and holding. This is shuttle launch control. This is shuttle launch control, T-minus 3 hours and holding, where we've entered the suit-up room. And we see our commander, Charlie Hobaugh, an astronaut since 1996 and a veteran of 2 space shuttle flights, STS-104 and STS-118. And pilot Butch Wilmore, he's making his first flight. He's served here at Kennedy Space Center on the astronaut support team at KSC in launch and landing operations. He was selected as an astronaut in 2000. And mission specialist Mike Foreman, veteran of STS-123 in March 2008. He has 378 hours in space, including over 19 hours of EVA time in 3 spacewalks. And Dr. Robert Satcher, Bobby Satcher, selected as an astronaut in 2006. He's now making his first flight on the Space Shuttle. And it's mission specialist Randy Bresnik making his first flight and also serving as an EVA crew member on mission STS-129 aboard Atlantis. And Leland Melvin, having flown on STS-122 in 2008, and he has logged over 306 hours in space. And they'll be walking out to the astronaut transfer van in about 15 minutes. We've got about 17 minutes, 22 seconds now remaining in this planned built-in hold at T-minus 3 hours, where the countdown operations are continuing to go smoothly. We've had no hitches. Everything is going right along on the timeline. So with an improvement in our clouds here at the Cape, we are in good shape for a 2:28 p.m. launch this afternoon. At T-minus 3 hours and holding, this is shuttle launch control. Crew now in the elevator, headed down the elevator. And now here down at the bottom of the elevator, we should see them walk out. The Astrovan is awaiting right outside the door, and there are numerous Kennedy Space Center employees as well as the news media waiting to greet them as they walk out. Here are our 6 astronauts. And after a brief wave to awaiting employees and the news media, they are now aboard the Astrovan, along with our chief of the astronaut office here, Jerry Ross. And they'll be followed by the customary security van. It's about a 20-minute ride from the operations and checkout building where the astronaut crew quarters are located out to our seaside launch pad 39A out at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. And there they go. And there'll also be a security helicopter flying overhead to watch the convoy as it heads out to the pad. And now on they go. 3 more miles from the Launch Control Center out to the pad. And the astronaut van now arriving at launch pad 39A. Will be going through the pad gate and up the ramp. The Astra van is now on top of the pad. Here we see the curved tracks over which the rotating surface structure pulls away from the space shuttle. And there are some of the astronauts waving to some of the launch team who are part of the pad crew. The crew now starting up the elevator. And they are now at the orbiter access arm. Joining us right now here in firing room 4 is astronaut Jim Kelly. He became an astronaut in 1996, and in Houston at the Johnson Space Center he has a diverse background working in the Space Shuttle branch. He's also worked in the International Space Station branch as a Capcom and mission control, and as a member of the astronaut support personnel team here at the Kennedy Space Center, responsible for crew pre-launch preparations. He was a pilot on STS-102 in 2001 and on STS-114 in 2005, and has logged 641 hours in space, all aboard Space Shuttle Discovery. And he currently serves as the chief of the Capcom branch in Houston. Jim, thank you very much for joining us and talking through some of what the crew is going to be doing here shortly.
My pleasure to be here, George. Thank you very much.
And I think we've just seen them walk across the orbiter access arm, where we should see our commander boarding here shortly in the white room.
The white room guys in here that you're seeing, they're getting everything ready to go. There's a group of 7, actually, folks that you'll see in the white coveralls there that take care of things. Number 1 is called the OVCC. Today that's Renee Arians, and he's the one that's kind of in charge of all the white room operations, making sure everything gets done safely, checking the oxygen levels, making sure all the operations go well to get folks inside the crew cabin and do all that. You've got number 2, who's the astronaut support personnel, which is what I did about a decade ago, and that's Shane Kimbrough. And Shane's responsible for helping out the strap-in tech, and he makes sure that everything gets done in there. And I'm sorry, I said Shane Kimbrough. It's actually Joe Akaba today is doing that. So Joe is going to be in there as number 2. And we can see Charlie Hobaugh coming in now. This is Charlie Hobaugh, also known as Scorch, Marine Colonel, who's the commander of this mission. He's helped get suited up here by Travis Thompson, who's number 4 on the closeout crew. Travis is a longtime closeout crew member. He's been doing it for over half the shuttle flights, and he's helping Charlie get his harness on before he goes in. You can kind of see there's a whole cluster of activity around Scorch. You got everybody that's helping out here. You got Travis in the back, and the guy on the left, number 7, is George Brittingham. He's one of the orbiter insertion techs. He actually helps out here, and then he actually straps in the mid-deck personnel. Number 3, who's Drew Billingsley, we haven't seen yet. Drew is the one that actually on the inside is going to strap in Scorch into the commander's seat on the flight deck. So we've got insertion techs, number 3 on the flight deck, number 7 on the mid deck, and they actually get the crew in there. So out here, they're just getting his harness set. They're getting all of his emergency gear in place. They're putting, if you notice on his side pocket on his sleeve there, they put in the chem lights. In case all the lights go out and those kind of things. They make sure everything's comfortable. It's very important to make sure this harness is on comfortably, so you can see them pulling the material out from underneath the strap, so these guys feel good while they're laying on their back for several hours.
And here I guess we see...
Yeah, that was a quick shot of Joe and Drew on the inside right there on the flight deck, and when we go back that we'll see that. Yeah, we can see here, as I talked about, you can see that there's both guys in there happen. That's Joe Akaba has his hand on his head there, and that's the astronaut that's in there. You can kind of see Drew's leg on the bottom there. He's going to get up here and start helping Scorch get everything all settled. And Joe's job at this point is essentially to help Drew. Drew, is the suit insertion tech, is responsible for getting Charlie all strapped in and all set up correctly. And Joe essentially is helping him. You'll see him handing the parachute straps and the comm gear, help with the helmet. You saw him protecting Scorch's head as he got into his seat to make sure that we don't injure a crew member. So it's a very difficult process with these bulky suits to actually get on board and get in the right place. And so it really helps to have 2 folks.
Yeah, let's see who we got here now getting ready to board Atlantis.
Okay, we've got a couple of them lined up. Closer to the hatch there is Mike Foreman, and he's going to be the first guy onto the mid-deck. We kind of do a flight deck, flight deck, mid-deck as we go through because obviously it's very difficult to get more than one person strapped in at a time. So you can see George Brittingham, who's number 7 there. He's the insertion tech for the mid-deck. He's doing final checks on Mike, and Mike's going to be the first one onto the mid-deck. And you can kind of do the mid-deck in any order you want from the outside, either to the right mid-deck or left mid-deck first. The center seat has to go last because you have to go over the center seat. It's the mission specialist number 6 seat to get everybody on. Now, in this case, there's only 6 people because they're actually picking up their 7th crew member on board the International Space Station. So Mike's seat is actually the left seat on the mid-deck, and he has to go over the right seat on the mid-deck to get up there. So that's why he's going into the mid-deck first. So you can see him saying goodbye to Travis, waving to everybody, and getting handshakes from Jack Burrett and everyone else on the closeout crew before he goes on board. Next in line there, you can see in the foreground is Butch Wilmore. Butch is the pilot on the mission. So as we said on the flight deck, commander goes in first, then the pilot. So he'll be the next one in, and he's just getting his harness put on there, and you can see he's wrestling it around just to make sure it's all nice and snug and comfortable and making all the connections there, and he'll be the next guy to go into the flight deck. We can see back up in the flight deck here now, this is Scorch finishing the strap-in process. You can see Drew still working on his connections and everything. And in the white room, as you can see there, it is Bobby Satcher that came into the room there, so he's standing over on the right. He's already got his harness on, so they should be just about done with Scorch up on the flight deck, and Butch will be going in here in just a second. You can see him closer to the hatch. Bobby's already got his harness all set, and Bobby's another rookie, so this is his first flight into space. One of our educator astronauts, just an absolutely phenomenal astronaut, going to be doing a couple spacewalks on the flight, and you can tell he's nice and relaxed before his first flight here, so saying hello to everybody, waving to the cameras, and just getting ready to go. Okay, we're back on board the flight deck now, and you can actually see Butch Wilmore getting in his seat. You can see it's a pretty involved process getting your legs down in there with the big orange suit on, the launch and entry suit. So you can see him getting down in position there. Once again, we've got Joe standing on the floor behind him. He's going to help get him in, as well as Drew will be standing on the mission specialist number 2 seat to help him get all connected up. So it's very important. You can see Butch here trying to push himself as far down in the seat as possible. That's very necessary to get the parachute on right and everything like. We have flashback to the white room here. You can see Leland Melvin, who's going to go into the number 6 seat, the second one downstairs on the right. I'm sorry. Bobby is going to the second seat on the right downstairs. Leland came in. He's going to go on the rightmost seat on the flight deck. He's mission specialist number 1 going uphill. So he's actually going to go there. Once they're done with Butch and they're no longer standing on those seats, we'll get him across the mission specialist number 2 seat into mission specialist number 1 seat.
OBCC. Go ahead. MS-1 on board. MS-1 on board at 1640. And CTC.
Back on board the flight deck now, you can see that we've got Leland across in the mission specialist 1 seat. Joe moved the camera. We have this great strapping camera that the closeout crew provides for us, and Joe's the one that moves that around. And we've got a great shot looking directly back from the front part here. Scorch is on our right. We can see kind of his right shoulder. Butch is on our left. We can see his left shoulder. We can see Leland Melvin now in the mission specialist number 1 seat. You've got Drew, who's number 3, is now starting to get him strapped in. You can see there's a lot more room down there to get these guys strapped in. Drew can kind of stand over him and see everything, which makes it a lot more easy. Great view of the white room here. The final crew member that goes on, it's always mission specialist number 2. They're always the last person on board. They've got that center seat on the flight deck is Randy Brezhnik, and this is Randy's first flight. He's a rookie on this flight. He's doing a couple spacewalks. He's also the intravehicular crew member on one of the spacewalks and doing some robotics work. So this is his first trip into space. You can see back aboard the flight deck again here. You've got Joe and Drew still in there helping out with things. They're finishing up on Leland in mission specialist number 1 seat. These closeout crew guys, they're just amazing what they do. They work together as a team. They do a lot of practice together. They're fantastically professional. They just do an absolutely great job. And you can see they keep the atmosphere light too. They make sure the crew members are smiles on their faces before they get on board.
1658.
Nice shot of Randy going on here, and you can see why he's the last crew member in. His seat was Grand Central Station for getting the other 3 in on the flight deck, so that's why he's the last crew member in.
Attention on that. This is the NTD conducting the launch status check. All stations verified, ready to resume count and go for launch. OTC. OTC is go. TDC. TDC is go. TTC. TTC is go. LPS. LPS is go. Houston flight.
Houston flight is go.
Mila. Mila is go. STM. STM is go. Safety console.
Safety console is go.
SDE. SDE is go. LRD. LRD is go. SRO.
SRO is go. You have freeze clear launch.
And CDR. The crew at Atlantis is go. Copy, thank you. And launch director, NTD.
Launch director.
Our launch team is ready to proceed.
Okay, copy that, Steve. Thank you. I'll do my poll at this time. KC Chief Processing Engineer, verify no constraints to launch.
No constraints.
Thank you, Steve. Payload Launch Manager.
Mike, the ISS ground processing team is ready to go.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. KC Safety Mission Assurance.
KC safety and mission assurance is go, Mike.
Thank you, Mark. Range weather.
Weather is clear, all constraints. Winds are from 335 degrees, 18 to 25.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And Ops Manager.
See, Mike, MMT doesn't have any issues that we're tracking. Looks like a good day. You are go to launch Atlantis.
Okay, copy that. CDR Launch Director.
Go ahead.
Okay, Charlie, all the vehicle systems are outstanding today. The weather is near perfect for a good lift-off and flight today, and our RSS is retracted. So on behalf of the KSC processing and launch teams, wish you good luck, Godspeed, and we'll see you back here just after Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Mike. We really appreciate all the effort that's gone into making this launch attempt possible. We know there's been a lot of people working some really long hours on weekends and long days. with all the vehicles that are out there. We're excited to take this incredible vehicle for a ride and meet up with another incredible vehicle, the International Space Station. So with that, thank you very much for all you've done, and everybody across the country that's participated. We're ready to go.
Thank you very much, George. Appreciate that. NTD, with that, you are clear to launch Atlantis.
Copy, clear to launch.
Picking up the count in 10 seconds.
Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. T-minus 9 minutes and counting. GLS auto sequence has been initiated.
The computer here in the firing room is now controlling all events associated with the launch. Over 1,000 parameters are going to be checked in the next 9 minutes. Right now we're activating the onboard flight data recorders on Atlantis. We're about to transmit the final program pre-launch commands.
Connect the central buses to fuel cells for your checklist.
Fuel cell buses being activated.
Central buses are connected to fuel cells.
We are going to be retracting the crew orbiter access arm in about 15 seconds.
TLS is go for orbiter access arm retract. Atlantis OTC, the station is waiting for its spare parts, and Nicole is waiting for her trip home, so we won't keep you here any longer. Have a great ride to orbit and a fantastic mission. Awesome. Thanks.
That was orbiter test conductor Jeff Laufer from the United Space Alliance.
Until station Space Ground 2 for BCAT 5.
Go ahead, Bob, for BCAT.
APU recorders are running. TLT OTC perform APU pre-start. That's first.
That rear card slot is being potentially problematic, and we should probably just use the forward card slot from now on. The question for you now is, would you like me to tweak the camera and the flash to days worth of additional photos for the PI, or are we going to call it quits there?
APU pre-start complete. Carry great contacts. And OTC copies.
And Bob, can you confirm, did you put the 1059 or the 1070 into the front slot of the camera?
1059, that's the original card.
All right, awesome. And right now it's trying to stay back to
T-minus 5 minutes, 30 seconds. We're starting our firing room data recorders here in firing room 4.
we do appreciate your help so much.
We're arming the solid rocket booster safe and arm devices.
Okay, so we'll stand down and I'll turn all equipment off then.
All right, thanks.
TLS is go for orbiter APU start. TLT OTC perform APU start. CDR OTC reconfigure heaters.
We're terminating LOX replenishment.
Heater reconfig is complete.
In about 30 seconds,
Start complete. OTC copies.
we'll see the orbiter's flight controls put through a final check. coming up in about 15 seconds. That'll be followed by a steering check of the 3 main engines, which we will also be able to see.
GLS is go for prepared sequence 4.
Now see a steering check of the rudder. Coming up on steering check for the 3 main engines. Verifying now those 3 main engines are in the start position.
GLS is go for ET LO2 pressurization. TLT OTC, clear caution warning memory, verify no unexpected errors.
Now I'll be starting the Cox vent arm retract, the beanie cap.
Caution and warning memory clear, no unexpected errors. I copy. And Atlantis, close and lock your visors, initiate O2 flow. Close the visors, initiating O2 flow.
Fuel cells now on internal. Terminating liquid hydrogen replenishment. Liquid hydrogen tank now being pressurized.
Minute 30 seconds.
Sound suppression water system now being armed for release. Confirmation we have 3 main engines ready for ignition. Space Shuttle now on internal power. Liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen fill and drain valves are closed. Solid rocket booster flight data recorders are activated. And the handoff to Atlantis' onboard computers. Atlantis now in control of the countdown. Firing chain is armed. Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station. Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit, 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up. Copy, go with throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnick, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the middeck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight, 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. Atlantis steering into the center lane of Highway 129 en route to the International Space Station. 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight, 34 miles in altitude, 48 miles downrange. Atlantis traveling 3,200 miles an hour. The propulsion officer in mission control reports that the orbital maneuvering system engines have ignited. Atlantis kicking on the afterburners. Atlantis flying on the singular power of its 3 liquid fuel main engines, draining about 1/2 ton of fuel per second from the large fuel tank. Coming up on the 3-minute mark into the flight, Atlantis 46 miles in altitude, 81 miles downrange, traveling almost 4,000 miles an hour. Atlantis speeding straight as an arrow toward its date with the International Space Station Wednesday morning. Three and a half minutes into the flight, all of Atlantis' systems functioning by the book. 55 miles in altitude, 120 miles downrange, traveling almost 5,000 miles an hour.
Atlantis, negative return. Atlantis copies, negative return.
Atlantis now too far downrange, too high in altitude to return to the launch site in the event of an engine failure. All 3 engines performing perfectly. 4 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. Atlantis now 62 miles in altitude, 180 miles downrange, traveling almost 6,000 miles an hour. All systems performing normally. Atlantis on course, on track for its preliminary orbit. The Environmental Systems Officer reports a good flash evaporator system activated for Atlantis, providing cooling for the shuttle's avionics until the payload bay doors are opened about an hour and a half into the flight.
Atlantis, press to ATO. Copy, press to ATO.
That call up from Capcom Chris Ferguson indicating that Atlantis can now make minimal orbital altitude targets in the event of an engine failure. However, all 3 engines continue to perform normally, as do the auxiliary power units and the 3 power-producing fuel cells. 5.5 minutes into the flight, Atlantis now 67 miles in altitude, 312 miles downrange, traveling
Atlantis,
almost 8,000 miles an hour. Atlantis now beginning to roll to a heads-up position, the main engine swiveling, enabling the shuttle to move to a heads-up position above its fuel tank, gaining more favorable communications through the tracking and data relay satellite system as it heads uphill.
Atlantis, press the MECO, single engine Zaragoza 104.
Press the MECO, single engine Zaragoza 104.
That call from Capcom Chris Ferguson to Commander Charlie Hobaugh indicating that Atlantis can make normal orbital cutoff targets in the event of an engine failure.
X, go for the pitch.
Okay, nominal shutdown, go for plus X, go for the pitch.
Now 6 minutes 45 seconds into the flight. Atlantis 66 miles in altitude, almost 500 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, traveling almost 11,000 miles an hour. 90 seconds left in powered flight.
Atlantis, single engine press 104.
Single engine press 104.
Coming up on the 7.5-minute mark into the flight, the main engines will once again be throttled down to limit the stress on the shuttle and its 6 crew members to that of 3 times the effect of gravity. Atlantis approaching a speed of more than 4 miles a second. At the time of main engine cutoff, a minute from now, Atlantis will enter its preliminary orbit at a speed of 5 miles a second. Seven minutes, 40 seconds into the flight. Atlantis providing a smooth ride uphill for Commander Charlie Hobaugh and his crew. 700 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, traveling 15,000 miles an hour. Eight minutes, 10 seconds into the flight. Standing by for main engine cutoff. Main engine cutoff confirmed by the booster officer, standing by for external tank separation. And the bird's eye view from the external tank camera of external tank separation. Atlantis now in its preliminary orbit. Commander Charlie Hobaugh will now maneuver Atlantis so that cameras embedded in the shuttle's umbilical well can perform photography of the discarded external fuel tank. And Mike Foreman and Leland Melvin are about to use digital still and video cameras to capture handheld imagery of the tank for downlink
Atlantis,
a few hours from now. A flawless climb to orbit for the shuttle Atlantis and its 6 crew members en route now to the International Space Station.
Nominal MECO, OMS 1 is not required.
It was a beautiful view here on the station. I'm sure you guys enjoyed it on the ground as well. And we are looking forward to all our guests in a couple of days.
Fergie will meet you in the post, OMS 1.
And we'll see you there, George.
Hey, Fergie, for Tom.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just sorry with you. We're going to turn off area. We're getting some static on it.
Okay, we copy OMS 2 burn setup. We're about a minute and a half from spreading.
Team is armed. Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit, 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Go with throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnick, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the mid-deck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight, 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. Atlantis steering into the center lane of Highway 129 en route to the International Space Station.
Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit, 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit, 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Go with throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnick, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the mid-deck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines.
Higher engine.
1 minute, 50 seconds into the flight. 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. Atlantis steering into the center lane of Highway 129 en route to the International Space Station. 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight, 34 miles in altitude, 48 miles downrange. Atlantis traveling 3,200 miles an hour. The propulsion officer in mission control reports that the orbital maneuvering system engines have ignited. Atlantis kicking on the afterburners.
Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now check.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research. Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Copy, go ahead, throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck.
Firing chain is armed. Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Copy, go ahead, throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnik, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the middeck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight. 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Wednesday, followed by the hatch opening later in the day. At the moment,
Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now control that. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Copy, go ahead, throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnik, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the middeck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight. 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. Atlantis steering into the center lane of Highway 129 en route to the International Space Station. 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight, 34 miles in altitude.
System activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now control that. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The three liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. 55 seconds into the flight, all systems operating normally, 900 miles an hour. The speed of Atlantis right now, 6 miles in altitude, 9 miles downrange.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Go with throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Charlie Hobaugh, joined on the flight deck by pilot Butch Wilmore, flight engineer Randy Bresnik, and Leland Melvin. Seated down on the middeck are Mike Foreman and Bobby Satcher, kicking off their work week with a Monday commute to orbit. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight, Atlantis 13 miles in altitude, 15 miles downrange, traveling almost 2,000 miles an hour. Three good auxiliary power units, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight, 10 seconds away from solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. Atlantis steering into the center lane of Highway 129 en route to the International Space Station. 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight, 34 miles in altitude, 48 miles downrange. Atlantis traveling 3,200 miles an hour. The propulsion officer in mission control reports that the orbital maneuvering system engines have ignited. Atlantis kicking on the afterburners. Atlantis flying on the singular power of its 3 liquid fuel main engines, draining about a half a ton of fuel per second from the large fuel tank. Coming up on the 3-minute mark into the flight, Atlantis 46 miles in altitude, 81 miles downrange, traveling almost 4,000 miles an hour. Atlantis speeding straight as an arrow toward its date with the International Space Station Wednesday morning. Three and a half minutes into the flight, all of Atlantis' systems functioning by the book. 55 miles in altitude, 120 miles downrange, traveling almost 5,000 miles an hour.
Atlantis, negative return.
Atlantis now too far downrange, too high in altitude to return to the launch site in the event of an engine failure. All 3 engines performing perfectly. 4 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. Atlantis now 62 miles in altitude, 180 miles downrange, traveling almost 6,000 miles an hour. All systems performing normally. Atlantis on course, on track for its preliminary orbit. The Environmental Systems Officer reports a good flash evaporator system activated for Atlantis, providing cooling for the shuttle's avionics until the payload bay doors are opened about an hour and a half into the flight.
Atlantis, press to ATO.
Press to ATO.
That call up from Capcom Chris Ferguson indicating that Atlantis can now make minimal orbital altitude targets in the event of an engine failure. However, all 3 engines continue to perform normally, as do the auxiliary power units and the 3 power-producing fuel cells. 5.5 minutes into the flight, Atlantis now 67 miles in altitude, 312 miles downrange, traveling
Atlantis,
almost 8,000 miles an hour.
First,
Atlantis now beginning to roll to a heads-up position, the main engine swiveling, enabling the shuttle to move to a heads-up position above its fuel tank, gaining more favorable communications through the tracking and data relay satellite system as it heads uphill.
Atlantis, press the MECO, single engine Zaragoza 104.
Press the MECO, single engine Zaragoza 104.
That call from Capcom Chris Ferguson to Commander Charlie Hobaugh indicating that Atlantis can make normal
Atlantis,
orbital
nominal
cutoff
shutdown
targets in
plan.
the event of an
Go
engine
for the
failure.
X, go for the pitch.
Okay, nominal shutdown, go for +X, go for the pitch.
Now 6 minutes 45 seconds into the flight. Atlantis 66 miles in altitude, almost 500 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, traveling almost 11,000 miles an hour. 90 seconds left in powered flight.
Atlantis, single engine press 104.
Single engine press 104.
Coming up on the 7.5-minute mark into the flight, the main engines will once again be throttled down to limit the stress on the shuttle and its 6 crew members to that of 3 times the effect of gravity. Atlantis approaching a speed of more than 4 miles a second. At the time of main engine cutoff a minute from now, Atlantis will enter its preliminary orbit at a speed of 5 miles a second. Seven minutes, 40 seconds into the flight. Atlantis providing a smooth ride uphill for Commander Charlie Hobaugh and his crew. 700 miles. Standing by for main engine cutoff. Main engine cutoff confirmed by the booster officer, standing by for external tank separation. And the bird's eye view from the external tank camera of external tank separation. Atlantis now in its preliminary orbit. Commander Charlie Hobaugh will now maneuver Atlantis so that cameras embedded in the shuttle's umbilical well can perform photography of the discarded external fuel tank. And Mike Foreman and Leland Melvin are about to use digital still and video cameras to capture handheld imagery of the tank for downlink
Atlantis,
a few hours from now.
MECO,
A flawless climb to orbit for the shuttle Atlantis and its 6 crew members en route now to the International Space Station.
Nominal MECO, OMS 1 is not required. Fergie will meet you in the post, OMS 1.
And we'll see you there, George.